Hey guys, VoyMonk here doing a video voiceover, and yeah, I'm right now in December and about a couple weeks away from Christmas. And there's a lot of things going and toiling through my head as far as what to say and how I wanted to make this video voiceover, which is a little bit different in terms of its time constraints. When I do video voice vlogs, I try to make sure that they're anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes without going over too often. But with these video voiceovers, I try to make sure that they're at least anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes. Although, like I said, the constraints are more or less about whatever it is I have to say, and it's not necessarily going to fit in a video voice vlog. So, but that being said, over the last few weeks, I've had a lot of different ideas about what it is I wanted to talk about. I somewhat kind of use this. Maybe some people say, well, this is a diary or a journal or something like that. And there's something to be said for that too as well. But then, of course, the response to that is, well, there's probably a lot of journals, a lot of diaries, a lot of different people that keep things to themselves and they don't share with others. And maybe that's kind of a good thing. I think that when it comes to sharing, there is a fine line between overshare and just being authentic and real and saying whatever it is that's true. I think whatever's true doesn't necessarily always have to be complete in terms of its going back to the oversharing thing. I think you can tell the truth. You can say what's true without necessarily getting into things that, quite frankly, aren't of actual interest to anyone else in terms of not only not caring, but it's not something that ultimately is relatable on a collective in a collective way. And so, like I said, that's the balance, right? I mean, some things aren't going to be, but some things just aren't appropriate to share, especially on YouTube, because there are restraints, and for good reason. I mean, there are people that have all different kinds of situations where maybe that's not appropriate. And I'm not saying that I'm an advocate for censorship or anything like that. I'm just saying that I understand the rhyme and reason behind certain kinds of rules and things of that nature. Because this is not a safe space, a safe place, as some people like to coin the term. The fact of the matter is when I'm talking to you, I could be talking to 10 people or 1 million people or 1 billion people. I mean, I don't know the trajectory or the map or the road that this signal is going to necessarily reach. I mean, sometimes things can become famous, they can become infamous overnight, and people don't necessarily always know why. And this season right now, I mean, there's a lot of things that are going on in the world as a whole, whether it's, socially or economically or whatever. And I don't speak to a lot of those things as far as from an opinion, meaning, I mean, there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on already. A good chunk of the reason why I don't do that is that I don't have any answers for you. I don't know what the solution is. Hell, I don't even know if I know for sure what the problem is. And I know that there's a lot of people that are sure that they do. It's just that while I'm sure as well, I'm not sure that I'm sure anymore. And it's not because I'm wishy-washy. I'm absolutely determined and convicted in my beliefs and the things that I do for sure follow. It's just that at the end of the day, it's still the bigger question of what does it really matter? And again, this isn't emotional dumping. This is just sharing experiences that I think a lot of people are having. People trying to do that exhale. No matter where you're at, no matter what you're doing, no matter who you are, it doesn't matter. I don't care. If you're listening to this, you're listening. And there's something to be said for that. And if you want to share your experience, I definitely encourage you to do the same thing. And of course, people can always ask, well, why? Why share anything? I mean, isn't there enough people on talking and whatever? And I would say, yes, there absolutely is. And I think there's a lot of room for a lot more. It's just not all things are going to be for all people. And I would say that that's something that I've come to appreciate more as I've aged. I mean, I'm 47 years old, and, I can say that there's never been a point or time in my life that I felt like, well, I got to be number one. I got to be a rock star. Certainly I've had aspirations and delusions or dreams, whatever you want to call it, to a small degree. But as far as ruling the universe or the galaxy or the world or something like that, like I said, at 47 especially, I don't think that that's necessarily something that matters beyond what affects me directly and those that I love and care about. And when I say that, I honestly, at 47 years old, understand that there's a limit to what I should and can control. And I don't say that that's necessarily a bad thing either, but for myself, only myself, my experience in that, and maybe that seems pretty selfish, but yeah, I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to put anyone out. I don't want to do anything that makes me the hero or the villain. I'm just probably like a lot of people, just trying to find my own niche and my own okay. And I think that's an important distinction to make. As far as where we are, at least I'm speaking about myself. Like I said, I'm not making any proclamations about anyone or what anyone else should or could be doing. I'm just saying that the year 2025 in the season 2 weeks before Christmas, that's a lot of what's actually on my mind. And I think about that because there's so many different things that, are probably going through everyone's head. And it's probably because of the fact that, as I said before, there's a lot of voices out there that are talking, many of them not saying very much, and many of them only speaking because they have their own reasons for doing it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. It just doesn't mean that it ultimately matters for everyone. And when you consider the fact that there's close to 7 billion people on this planet trying to find their way through, finding what works on an individual basis is a thing that I think becomes more complicated the further we go, whether it's individual or a collective. And so, like I said, I don't think, it's a bad thing, like I said, for people to express themselves or to create content or to engage with others. I just think that probably for me at least, the biggest thing is the ability to slow down, to stop. Kind of like during the pandemic with COVID, and the fact that I think the thing that may have jarred a lot of people was the fact that unlike before, people were they were set. They had to stop for a minute. They couldn't go somewhere immediately or distract themselves from whatever it is that they were thinking or realizing. They had to actually sit with maybe someone that they married or someone that they lived with or friends that they thought that they had or knew. Come to realization that, life is a lot more complicated than the cliches or the platitudes or the sayings that we often sometimes here, sometimes ad nauseum, motivations of, who and what we should be and how we're supposed to do them and whose fault it is ultimately. I mean, a lot of finger pointing. And then, of course, the cultural stigma as far as who we should be, and, of course, the consequences of when we don't live up to the expectations of what other people have for us, despite the fact that we never signed up or agreed to anything. So I think there's a little bit of everything, and I am babbling a bit, but hopefully it's a constructive kind of babbling where I'm basically just getting out of me all the things that really require my attention and to organize in a way that truly makes sense. And I think that that's what vlogging can definitely do. I think that's what making content can do. And I think that's why sometimes it can be cathartic. I think that's oftentimes why people who make content or performers or whatever, sometimes when people watch long enough, especially if someone who's famous or infamous, it's something that's grandiose, there's a thing that can be attached to by everyone that says, okay, I get that, or I agree with that, or I disagree with that. Whether it's actually true, though, is certainly up for debate in a lot of ways. I don't think it's a great debate. I think when it comes to content, for the most part, whether it's called reality TV or it's scripted, there's always some pullback. Whether it's for good reason or it's for reasons. I mean, the truth of the matter is that when it comes to life itself, most people find life itself boring. I'm not talking about as it's presented or anything like that, or scripted or, produced. I'm talking about as it is. Right? I mean, we have illusions about what cops and doctors and lawyers and all that stuff do, but the truth of the matter is that a lot of that is not only just disgusting, disheartening, soul-crushing, but if it's not any of those, sometimes it's just boring. And for some people, I think that can be worse if something is boring. Me, I love boring. I'm a big boring fan. I love boring. When nothing is going on, that's where that's where I want to be. Safe, secure. And maybe that's the illusion that comes with that boring, but I don't know. I like when things are safe. I don't find evil or pain or hurting others to be appealing in any way, shape, or form. I don't think embarrassment or humiliation is a great tool for it towards anyone. But at the same time, I'm not naive enough to believe that everybody wants to hold hands and, sing Kumbaya either. I recognize that there's a lot of nuance and layers, and not all things are for all people. That's why I said when I was younger, I certainly had different ways of thinking and feeling about things as opposed to the way I do now. Not entirely or completely. I mean, I never looked to be a rock star or, a star athlete or anything like that. But I certainly did want some things that I look back at and think wasn't necessarily as necessary as maybe I made it up in my mind. It still would have, things are nice to have. But the better question, I think, is who are we? And I talk about COVID and the fact that life and people had to slow down and kind of figure that out. Well, I think some people think that we're also paying the consequences to that. When something, meaning nothing, is going on, I think that's when the alarm bells go off in some people's heads. That, if you just sit with silence, right? If you just sit with silence, if there's not something constantly filling it, right? If there's not something constantly filling that silence or that gap, then there's obviously something wrong. I don't know if that's a psychosis or a part of a PTSD or something like that. I don't know. I think it's strange. I also think it's strange that how my brain at 47 years old, it also operates a little bit differently as well. I can honestly tell you that I think in the 80s and 90s I was a lot more patient and a lot less constrained or confined to my dopamine hit of puppies and kitties and things that all instantly stimulate me in the way that they do now. And that might be a problem. You know, I spoke of this channel towards the very beginnings about being mindful and presence of mind. And I think I have strived to do that better now this year as my resolution going into this year than I ever have before. But I can also say in recognition of that and what I'm approaching and talking about now is that that's a lot more difficult than it sometimes seems, right? I mean, I can understand and tolerate the silence because as a child, I grew up. I was very common. However, I'm a Gen Xer, and I'm not a millennial. I'm certainly not a Gen Z or an Alpha. And people talk about how they've been born into it and have never had any real social silence or anything unlike, like I said, COVID or whatever. And it was really, I guess, a challenge. I'm also not necessarily tied to anything social. I mean, I don't think partying and being with large crowds and large people is appealing. I don't think I ever have. I'm a bit of an outcast. I've never culturally fit in a lot of places. I've not been especially liked if I've been known or loved or anything like that. It's just, again, not an emotional dumping. Like I said, that's just who I am. I am who I am, like Popeye said. But I don't think that I'm alone in that, though. I mean, I look around and I actually see a lot of, I guess, my own kind in those ways as well. And so, as it were, going into, like I said, in 2 weeks, or actually, no, a week. Well, actually, just a little over 2 weeks, about 10 days. We got Christmas around the corner. And it's an interesting time, to say the least, right now. I mean, people are stressed. People are looking at the world and they're not necessarily sure what the future holds. And I don't know that that's necessarily something new. But I can say that I think there is a bit of a reckoning at hand. Like I said, I think, there's going to be a lot of learning, whether people see that as good or bad, these next few weeks and months and years. As there's probably always, I mean, I'm not making any bold predictions or anything like that. I just think that for me, if you're an Xer, probably a big thing is I look to the yesteryear a little bit in terms of where things have been. Christmas in the late 80s to early 90s, and how, at least to me, things felt a lot calmer, a lot different. We had a lot less access and a lot less options, but I think at the same time we had a lot more appreciation, and that could just be my nostalgia delusion, but I thought that we had a lot more appreciation for what we did have, even though we didn't appreciate it at the time. I don't think. I think people kind of tend to remember things better than they were, and I think people who were never there to begin with sometimes project things that never actually happened. I find that a lot of that happening, at least with my generation and Gen Xers. There's a lot of trends and things like that. People will say things about Gen Xers, and I can honestly say, as an Xer, from my perspective, I'm a late Xer. I think a lot or most of these ideas are true, but a lot of them are a lot of nonsense, a lot of projection, and a lot of people carrying on in ways that, like I said, if you really could go back to the late 80s and early 90s, there is a lot of embarrassment that probably just gets glossed right over in terms of what was happening then and as opposed to what's happening now. I'm not saying good or bad or anything like that. It was just different. I mean, we definitely had violence growing up. I remember starter jackets and shoes were something that, quite frankly, if you lived certain areas, there was a potential for, things to happen that I don't necessarily hear about today as often as I could or would, especially with the fact that there's more reporting going on than ever before. Like I said, that's not an indictment, or it's not necessarily something that I'm pointing out for any particular reason other than I think generations are different. There's things that people can point out about the contrast, but yeah. And I'm saying that from a standpoint of someone, like I said, 47 years old. I miss those late 80s, early 90s Christmases. The music, the culture, even the things that we didn't have, like personal computers and the internet. I'm not, and it isn't to say that it was better. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, for me, it felt better. It feels better looking back on it and thinking about it. It was a beautiful time. And I would say if there's anything that I've learned mostly going into this Christmas season is this. It's not necessarily about where you want to be. And I'm saying this for myself. It's not about where you want to be or where you think you ought to be. The thing I learned, going into this year, the end of last year, is that being presence of mind and being thankful for what you have right now and being in the moment. Because in another 20 or 30 years, history repeats itself. There'll probably be a lot of the same thing that's happening now as it happened in the 80s and 90s and so on and so forth. So this Christmas, I think the greatest gift is now. That's the biggest thing for me in terms of how I feel about this particular video voiceover and content channel. And, what I have planned and what I have a vision for going forward, even into, next year, the end of next year. So if you are listening to this and you've made it through what is close to 25 minutes, I thank you. Because, I had a lot I wanted to really say about right now. And I really felt this was an important time to say it because I'm getting older. And, I can honestly say that the things that I treasure the most are the love that I have and loved ones that are here, and the blessings that I feel that I've got and I don't want to take for granted. And that going into this next new year, hopefully the blessings are good and abundant, and hopefully the world finds itself. I know a lot of people kind of look at things and, there's a lot of challenges. And like I said, I don't have any answers for any of those things. And, like I said, I'm not a hopium dealer either. I just think that, there's always things that we don't know, for good and for bad. And I hope in this situation, it means that that better times and better situations are just around the corner, and that we do what we can to appreciate where we are now. I'm talking about myself, I'm not telling anybody what to do, but that in taking those moments, slowing down, not because of a pandemic, but because we intend to find out the good things that we need in order to survive, to grow, and to become stronger, healthier, that's what we do. So that's going to pretty much do it for this VoyMonk Video Voice Over. Hopefully you have a great Christmas and time with loved ones and friends. And however you do, whatever you do, whether it's just with yourself or whatever, it's great. You're not alone, even if you feel that way. Like I said, I've made this channel because, like I said, I like to share, but also I wanted to create a community where others can share their experiences and passions and loves, and there being no expectation to this. So if you like what you hear, you're home. Just hit the subscribe button, or, comments, and engage if you'd like. Hopefully you're here for the journey, and you feel encouraged. And if I can do this, so can you. That's such a weird thing. I think if I can do this, a lot of people can do this. And if your heart means to do it, then like I said, I'm a fan, or not fan, but I'm there too. I think fan's such a thing. Anyways, that's gonna do it. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.